Cyril Gan, come to Dagestan, bro. Come to Dagestan. You have to come Dagestan, stay there 1.5, 2 years, learn about wrestling, learn how to wrestle. His last fight show his weakness. He have to learn how to wrestle. I don't wanna be like, oh, forget about your coaches and come. No, bring your coaches. Bring your coaches, come to Dagestan.
I've been planning this segment forever. It's probably the least political segment I've ever done. But I wanted to cover it because it's something I know quite a bit about, and it has to do with like geography and history and stuff. It also has to do with wrestling and MMA fighting. And we obviously have an MMA portion of Midwestern Marks, but it keeps getting banned by TikTok. So either way, I saw this video. Why are Dagestanis and Chechens so good at fighting? Okay, so Dagestan and Chechnya are in, I should have looked up how to pronounce it. It's like the Caucasus mountain region in Russia. I mean, they've been producing a lot of good fighters. So the most famous are probably Khabib Nurmagomedov, as well as his protege, Islam Makhachev, both of them UFC champions in the lightweight division from Dagestan. And then now we have this fighter from the same region from Chechnya, Khamzat Chimaev. And they are great fighters. Oftentimes they have long beards that kind of distinguishes them to the fans, like Abraham Lincoln style beards. And they're all from this very small region, this mountainous region where the main job of people in that region is just being a shepherd, right? So it's not a ton of industrialization, not a very I guess modern is the word, or, cosmopolitan society. It's sort of isolated, and it breeds very tough, very strong people. And folks are just now starting to notice this because of the popularity of the UFC. Because Khabib Nurmagomedov from Dagestan defeated Conor McGregor, the most famous MMA fighter in the West, and just absolutely destroyed him, crushed him, mauled him on the ground, and choked him out in the 4th round. Won almost every second of that fight. It made Dagestan very famous, and it made people curious, especially with the rise of Khamzat Chimaev. What is going on in this region? How are they producing these fighters? So I saw this video, and I wanted to give my own perspective on it after I play a few minutes of this video.
Why is this part of Russia so good at fighting? With Islam Makhachev defending his lightweight belt again against Volkanovski this past weekend, it got me asking a question that a lot of fight fans, I think, want the answer to. And it's why this part of Russia, specifically Chechnya and Dagestan, is so good at fighting. This tiny part of the globe has produced fighters such as Islam Makhachev, like I mentioned previously, but obviously you have the legend in Khabib Nurmagomedov and one of the best contenders at welterweight in Khamzat Chimaev. Obviously you have all of these elite wrestlers, but additionally you also have Artur Beterbiev, who is a great knockout artist in the light heavyweight division in boxing. Fighters in all of combat sports. So before I get into answering this question, I wanted to define this region that we'll be focusing on, and that is the Caucasus Mountains, which is a mountain range that naturally separates Eastern Europe and Western Asia. This cold and high elevation region is home to 2 now world-famous Russian republics, Dagestan and Chechnya. I also wanted to mention that neighboring this region is also the country of Georgia, which also includes a great array of UFC fighters such as Merab Dvalishvili, Giga Chikadze, and Ilya Topuria, just to name a few. But in this video, we're going to be focusing on the aforementioned republics of Dagestan and Chechnya. So the reason why these 2 countries are usually paired with each other is because they have a very similar history. The Chechens of Chechnya and the Avars of Dagestan are both warrior people of this mountain range that are primarily Muslim. Both Dagestan and Chechnya are both republics of Russia today, but they were taken by force by the Russian Tsar Nicholas I in the mid-1850s. Both regions have also had histories trying to revolt against the Russian rule. Most of these revolutions came from the Chechens and included 2 Chechen wars that spanned from the late 90s all the way to 2009. And though these wars usually pitted Chechnya versus Russia, there's also a war of Dagestan in the middle of these 2 Chechen wars, in which the Chechens tried to take over Dagestan from Russia, but ultimately failed. Though these wars ended in 2009, until today, these regions are still breeding grounds for violence between the Chechens and the Russians. Because of this war and violence, many fathers during this time would put their children in wrestling programs. And the programs in countries that were formerly under Soviet rule are extremely elite because of the USSR's heavy focus on wrestling, especially during the 70s and 80s, where they're just winning so many.
So I had a wrestler from Clarion once. Oops, I almost exited out of the stream on accident. A wrestler from Clarion, this nice school in the US, D1 school, tell me that Dagestan and Chechnya, or even Georgia, these Russian republics or Eastern countries that produce all these great wrestlers and fighters, are only good at wrestling because they're former Soviet countries, right? Because they formerly belonged to the Soviet Union. He said this to me on Twitter. And I was like, what is the correlation there? I mean, yeah, the Soviet Union may be focused on wrestling, but wouldn't you say that the Soviet Union was good at wrestling because the Soviet Union contained Georgia, Dagestan, and Chechnya? So all the great wrestlers from those areas were wrestling for the Soviet Union in the Olympics and stuff. How is it the fact that those areas, how are the good wrestlers in those areas a direct result of the Soviet Union? Right? They're a direct result of their own hard work and their culture, that's always been, sort of in fighting and chaos and destabilized since the collapse of the Soviet Union during these Chechen wars, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The U.S. sent a whole bunch of mujahideen fighters, a whole bunch of terrorists to exacerbate these wars and make them worse. But it's not just because of the Soviet Union that these areas have good wrestlers now. Someone said that about all of East Europe. That Clarion wrestler said that about all of East Europe to me. It's like they're only good because they were former Soviet republics. How is that how is the Soviet Union, which collapsed 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, the only reason that they have good athletes? Like, what are you talking about? It was just like the most, you could tell that guy thinks he's really smart, but he's just not. But anyways, so like the video says, Chechnya and Dagestan both have these long histories of producing like badass warrior people and being, in very violent states, similar to Georgia. And the reason people are now noticing this is because of Khabib Nurmagomedov. And this guy says later on in the video, Khabib Nurmagomedov was the first wrestler from this mountainous region to make it on the global stage, to really make it as a star. So I like this video. It's a good video, but that's not entirely true. In fact, that's not really true at all, because there have always been really, really great athletes, combat sports athletes produced by this region. Khabib was just the first one to get like real mainstream attention in the West, right, where wrestling isn't as popular as it is in the East, and where the UFC, MMA's really just exploded recently as the most popular combat sport. Largely thanks to Conor McGregor, who Khabib smashed, but not only because of Conor, but either way. There are a ton of Soviet and Russian wrestlers from this mountain region, the Caucasus, I don't know how to pronounce it, mountain region, that are some of the greatest of all time, right? So the reason I'm making this video and the reason I thought this was interesting was because I've known about this forever, my entire life growing up. Some of my favorite wrestlers and some of the ones I watched that my dad taught me about when I was very young, like Kuromagomedov, which was like, I was like 4 years old, and I would always tell people my favorite wrestler was Kuromagomedov just because I thought his name was funny. But I've been hearing about these guys forever, right? So the idea that it was just Khabib that kind of broke them through on the national stage is something I kind of want to combat here, kind of want to refute here. Because he mentions that Sambo and wrestling were huge in Dagestan and Chechnya. But that means that these wrestlers, these athletes that were good for Dagestan and Chechnya were huge, huge stars in their own country, right? Khabib may be the first person to break through on the global stage, but when it comes to Russia, when it comes to the East, when it comes to this region, their wrestlers and their Sambo athletes are huge stars in their own country. So Khabib would just be kind of the first one who got popular among Americans for them. But definitely not like their greatest combat sports athlete ever, right? Just their most famous one. But you have Buvasar Satiev, probably the greatest freestyle wrestler in the history of the world. Probably the greatest freestyle wrestler to ever do it. He won six world championships and 3 Olympic golds. 3 Olympic golds in wrestling, which means, and in wrestling, your prime isn't very long, right? There's only so much time where you can beat down your body like that before you start to deteriorate and not be as good, just get old. So he, obviously the Olympics are spaced out by 4 years, right? So he was the best in the world for that chunk of 4 years. And then he won it again. He was the best in the world for that chunk of 4 years. And then he won it again. So he was the best freestyle wrestler in the world over a period of 12 years. And the Olympics happen every 4 years. The world championships happen in between the Olympic championships. So in between winning those 3 Olympic golds in 12 years and getting silver or bronze once to an American wrestler named Brandon Slay. He also won 6 world golds. Now, Buvasar Satiev, one of the years that he didn't win world gold, or 2 of the years that he didn't win world gold, and 1 of the years he didn't win Olympics, were when he sat out, didn't wrestle, so that his brother, Adam Satiev, also from Chechnya, could win 2 world golds and 1 Olympic title. So he took a year off to let his little bro win. So not only, are there that many great wrestlers produced in this small mountainous region, but even within the same family, sometimes you have multiple Olympic or world champions. There's also Albert Saratov, a Chechnya world bronze and Olympic bronze. Abdul Rashid Sajulayev, who I said Buvasar Satiev was probably the best freestyle wrestler of all time. Abdul Rashid Sajulayev is the best freestyle wrestler in the modern era, and he's quickly catching Buvasar Satiev. By the time that Sajulayev is done, he'll probably be the best wrestler in the world. He is from Dagestan, not Chechnya, but Dagestan, same place as Khabib. Best wrestler in the world today at any weight class. He's won 2 Olympic golds, 5 world golds, and he not only beat multiple times, but pinned Kyle Snyder, who is the greatest U.S. wrestler right now. So the U.S.'s best guy got pinned by this dude from Dagestan. Snyder beat him once, but he's lost like 5 times. And that guy's only 26 years old, Sajulayev is. So he'll be the best probably ever by the time he's done. So the 2 best freestyle wrestlers ever are from Chechnya and Dagestan, and one of them would have more medals, but he took a couple of years off to let his brother win. You also have Abdul Salam Gadisov, who probably wins the award for being the scariest looking wrestler of all time. This is what Gadisov looked like when he was competing. I think he was probably on the juice because his muscles eventually went away when they started like testing a lot better. But this is the kind of people produced by Dagestan and Chechnya. This is the kind of build, at least. So I always just thought Gadisov looked insane. Ali Aliyev, 5-time world champ. I said Kuromagomedov's name wrong earlier when I was talking about him. It's Kuromagomedov. Kuromagomedov. Like I said, the first foreign wrestler I learned about because I thought my dad thought it was funny to hear me say his name all the time. He was a world champ and got world silver and bronze. He was a Russian Olympian and a 5-time European champ. Sharif Sharifov from Dagestan, who then went to Azerbaijan, where he was an Olympic and world champ for Azerbaijan. Also got a world bronze where he lost to Sajulayev, who was also from Dagestan. So you have people who leave Dagestan like Sharifov because they can't beat Sajulayev, and then they win, Olympic golds for other countries. And so that's what we're talking about here with how good this region is at combat sports, that sometimes people have to leave the Dagestan or Chechnyan Republic because they can't make the Russian team and go make someone else's team. You also have Magomed Ibragimov from Dagestan, who went to Uzbekistan. Same thing, left the country. He actually defeated Khabib Nurmagomedov in combat sambo in 2005 before winning an Olympic bronze, becoming the Asian Games champion, and winning the Medved, which is one of the best freestyle tournaments in the world. That list just goes on forever, right? Like here's a list of the notable combat sports athletes or the notable wrestlers from Dagestan. Hold on, where is it? And they have a lot of sports athletes anyways, but here's their famous mixed martial arts fighters. See, it's a very, very, very long list. Also have Muay Thai. And here are their good wrestlers. Look how long this list is. Right, so this isn't anything new. I know Khabib is the first one to get on like Americans' radars, or Islam Makhachev, who's the lightweight champion now. But they've been good for a long time. And this is Satiev. He looks very unassuming. Sajulayev, the best wrestler in the world today, he looks scary as crap. He looks like he's built like a tank. And actually, that's his nickname, is the Russian tank. Satiev looked very weird. He just looked like a nice, like kind of skinny old man. But then he was just amazing. He was just impossible to take down. He was so good at wrestling. So yeah, thought that was interesting.
They never changed their training. because they don't care what the rules are, they care what the body did. Because the body you could replicate, rules alter. Russia was amazing. You know, after the Olympics, I wanted to go see where everybody was winning, right? I showed you the statistic yesterday at the European Championships. At the European Championships that just ended, there's 10 weight classes in men's freestyle. Russia had 5 gold medals, 2 silvers, and 3 bronze. I went to the Olympics, and like I felt like I wasn't close. And so I was like, man, like I gotta understand what these people are doing, because they're winning year after year. It was a remote village in North Ossetia, just north of Georgia. Maybe 150,000 people in the city, 150,000 people, maybe 1 million people in the whole North Ossetia. But the amount of world and Olympic champions that they've had in that one region just blew my mind. You know, they like year after year after year, this small group of people kept producing these same champions, and it was the same as the Chechens and the Dagestanis, which are neighbors. So that tiny little region of the Caucasus Mountains were just producing all these same people. And so then I started learning about their training system. The training system was invented after World War II. They got it from the Nazi scientists, like a lot of their studies on like the metabolic pathways and you know, how the brain and the body works together. And so they've used the same training for 50 plus years, no matter what the rules were. And which that really blew my mind, you know, because in America we're like, oh, well, if the rules change, we're going to change our training to replicate what the rules are. Well, they never changed their training, because they don't care what the rules are, they care what the body did. Because the body you could replicate, rules alter. And so I ended up living there for 11 months total, and just wrote down every day what I was doing. And that's where I came up with the training system.
And you know, people always say, oh, you're critical of the US proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. You know, why do you worship Russia? Why do you love Russia and Putin? You know, it's like, well, I don't love their government, and you know, I don't have some like infatuation with Russia to the point where I would support them in any kind of conflict and, you know, think that they're always right. But I don't hate them. I don't have this blind hatred towards them where I'm like, yes, use all my tax dollars to destroy the Russian people, like liberals want you to think. Right? Because I've admired Russian wrestlers since I was this tall. All right, I've been watching Russian wrestlers, and I realized that they're just regular people like we are in America. Right? They're just people with hobbies who work jobs and, you know, have their own culture and their own goals and their own interests, just like we do in America. And no, I don't want them to be killed through warfare, just like I don't want our people to be killed through warfare, which is why I was against, you know, overthrowing the Ukrainian government and waging a proxy war against the Russians. I don't want their people to die. I don't want our people to die. I don't want Ukrainian people to die. But I don't know, because of wrestling, like there's so much Russophobia and anti-Russia sentiment in the U.S. media and in the U.S. propaganda machine, right? And it's just something I've never, ever, ever, ever fallen for or fallen into, because I've always had admiration for the Russian wrestlers, right? I'm like, no, they're not just these evil, horrible people who want to destroy the U.S. A lot of them really love the U.S. Kyle Snyder and Abdulrashid Sajalayev, the best U.S. wrestler and the best Russian wrestler, are buddies. Snyder goes to Dagestan all the time, and Sajalayev, like, you know, they show him food and they show him the Russian culture, and it's very cool. So no, I don't want to destroy their people like the U.S. death machine wants me to. And then, you know, when I say that, be like, you are a puppet of Putin. You are just a simp for Russia. Like, okay, because I don't hate these people, because I don't want to blow these people up, use my tax dollars to blow these people up, and because I think they're good at sports, I'm a Putin simp. Sounds like you're just a psycho who wants to destroy Russia. Sounds like you just have a vendetta against Russia and you think they're evil and you need to relax a little bit. Thousands. So like I said, a lot of these fighters would have grown up in like a war-torn situation, a situation where they need to fight. The Second Chechen War only ended in 2009, and there were thousands of Mujahideen fighters killed. The Mujahideen were Osama bin Laden's terrorist group, who the U.S. gave a bunch of arms and support to in Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s. and they then spread and caused a lot of problems and destabilization elsewhere, like in Russia, for example, or in the Xinjiang region in Western China, where you have the ETIM, this basically group that splintered off from the Mujahideen. And the U.S. took them off the list of terrorist groups so that they could promote them destroying things and causing problems in China. But like Khamzat Chimaev and Khabib Nurmagomedov and all these fighters would have grown up in this, right? They would have grown up around this. And of course, that makes them tough, right? That turns them into fighters. Growing up in such chaos with so much fighting. And yeah, if you want to read more about the U.S. funding of the Mujahideen and other violent extremist groups in Muslim majority regions, read America's Jihad, A History of Its Origins by Christian Parenti, son of Michael Parenti. And I'll send a link to that right now. Or read the book Washington Bullets by Vijay Prashad, where he says that the CIA had a document called Hope Lay in the Muslim Revival. And basically what they tried to do is look at any Muslim majority region on earth that was moving left, that was moving towards a more socialistic economy, and try and funnel arms and money into right-wing groups in that region, which oftentimes ended up being extremist terrorist groups like the Mujahideen. So this had lasting effects on all these regions. The Chechen wars and the war in Dagestan were definitely one of those lasting effects, or were worsened by the U.S. Supporting of extremist groups. And yeah. And different cultures breed different athletes, or different kinds of athletes, which is interesting. And like, you know, the Dagestan and Chechen republics aren't that much bigger than like a handful of U.S. states. Right? Like it might be the size of the Midwest. And you see similar things in the US. Like wrestling's not very popular in the South, where it's not freezing cold in the winter because there's more to do in the winter. You can go outside, but in the Midwest, it's pretty popular because during the winter, you know, there's not really anything better to do than go wrestle inside in a wrestling room. Versus if you're in Louisiana, you're going to miss out on a lot of cool stuff if you go out for your school's wrestling team. That you still should if you're in Louisiana, but and you know, even between like states in the Midwest, like Greco-Roman wrestling is a lot more popular in Minnesota and Wisconsin than it is in Iowa. So you even have different cultures that breed different kinds of athletes in different state regions. Yeah, very, very cool and interesting. I appreciate everyone who bared with me through that. I know it's not what we usually talk about. I know it's probably not what everyone came here for, but sometimes I just like to tell y'all about or just ramble about wrestling, because I've studied it since I was in kindergarten, and before kindergarten when I was like 1, and I have like an encyclopedic knowledge about wrestling. So sometimes I want to use that. There you go. I don't know. Isn't Campbell a big wrestling school? They're one of the worst Division I wrestling schools in America. But they had a coach, Kerry Colott, who was a very famous American wrestler, a very good American wrestler, who now is a coach at Navy, I believe. Your contents are good. Thank you. You're from Iran, right, Fallenberg? Iran wrestling is bigger in Iran too. Speaking of how different cultures promote different sports, and if you think about sports in the U.S., like in neoliberal societies, it's always spectator sports, right? That only certain people can participate in, right? So it's sports that are based around consumerism. Like football is great because it has a lot of breaks. Right? There's like 30-second breaks, or there's like a 30-second break for every 7 seconds of playing. That's advertising time, right? Advertisers can hop in during the 2-minute warning or whatever else and make a ton of money during the 3-hour football game, which a huge portion of America is watching. So football allows them to keep a captive audience, which they can smash with ads and, you know, imperialist U.S. military propaganda for 3 hours straight every weekend. Similar things with basketball. You know, you only have 5 people in a basketball game, and individual sports stars, individual stars are able to take their teams to new heights often and help their teams achieve victory, promoting individualism. So the kind of sports that are promoted in neoliberalism, in neoliberal societies, oftentimes are sports that work well for capitalism, that work well for the capitalist class, that work well as a tool, versus in like regions that have been torn by war, like Dagestan and Chechnya, without a whole lot of industrialization and, you know, material comforts for their people, compared to the US or like, you know, elsewhere, places in the East for the most part. Sports like wrestling are more popular. Like the Pep Tillman thing during the Super Bowl, his family hates that foundation. That was insane, wasn't it? They literally brought up Pat Tillman. They try and, you know, use his name for war propaganda. When Pat Tillman was an NFL player who enlisted in the army and was sent to Iraq because he wanted to help, quickly realized that the U.S. were not the good guys in Iraq. They were the bad guys. Started telling people about it, started saying, this is not what I came here for. We're killing women and children, and we're doing this for oil oligarchs. And then his own squadron killed him. They massacred him. They shot him, and they said it was a friendly fire incident. Whoops. We accidentally murdered the guy who's critical of the war and who was an NFL player, so the media is actually going to listen to him. Whoops. Accidentally friendly fire and bullshit. And then they try and use him for propaganda. Like, how sick and disgusting is that? But yes, exactly. That's exactly how the NFL works. And then you had the Eagles coach was like crying when they were like singing the national. It was Chris Stapleton singing the national anthem. It's like, you know, he's just crying. The troops, they keep us so safe. And, you know, I am in favor of the troops, but the troops are being sent to fight and die and get PTSD and have no health care when they come home for oil oligarchs, right? And for shareholders on Wall Street. That's what essentially the U.S. military is fighting for. Sorry, that's just the reality. And then this football coach is crying about it on the Super Bowl, and all of America's like, oh, God bless our troops. You know, I'm going to send all my money to Ukraine to help the troops or whatever. And yeah, that's how it works. That's how they use spectator sports to propagandize people.